Hi there. Welcome back. This time around, we're doing a Shaman soul. I've done a little bit playing around just to kind of check out because I haven't used Shaman for a bit. With that playing around, was looking at what could be different specs. So one that I tried realizing was Defiler could maybe work, or as well Kabbalist. What they both have is increasing wisdom. They don't really give you anything much else. Defiler does give you Rage Blade, which increases your damage done by 5% um, once you have all 5 stacks. But what it lacks from the normal spec, sorry, not Inquisitor, the normal spec, as you can see right here, if you want to pause it to get it down as well on the forum thread in guild forums, will be a link to the spec as well. But in Inquisitor, instead of increasing wisdom, we're increasing spell power, but you get armor devotion buff, which increases our critical hit chance with damaging abilities by 5%. This buff is more important than increasing our wisdom. In the long run of increasing stats, wisdom gives us some spell power, plus it gives us spell critical hit chance. So increasing wisdom is more beneficial than increasing spell power because of that. Increasing spell power is more beneficial than increasing outright damage. But since this increases our spell power, plus we get a 5% crit chance buff, that benefits us more than what a wisdom would do. Checking with just my gear, as you can see here, spell critical hit rating is 22.65. That is currently with the mastery of Steady Assault, reducing my damage by 4%. I was testing that as well. The other one that I did, just Oracle Defiler, either one doesn't matter really, but let's pick Steady Assault as well. Sorry, while I do this, I'll figure. So, spell critical hit rating is 23.69. So, really, with my gear, I got a 1 point something increase. So really, the best spec still is the, sorry. I apparently like to go back to Inquisitor over Shaman. You can tell which one I normally DPS in. 22.65 compared to the 23.67. I forget exactly what it was, but it was 23. So 1% crit chance. But this is without my 5% buff from Inquisitor. So I end up still with 4% more crit chance than I would have had with a different spec that was increasing wisdom over the spell power. So currently the best spec still, from just looking at stats, is 61 Shaman, 10 Druid, 5 Inquisitor. 10 Druid being 5 points in Speak Softly, increasing your wisdom, and then 5 points in Mercurial, increasing our damage done with instant abilities by 10%. 5 points in Inquisitor go into Planar Study, increasing our spell power by 10%. Reason for this is that Druid gives us combined effort and as well Eruption of Life. Pretty good abilities to have. Combined effort for 15 seconds are single target abilities put a debuff on our target that they then take 5% more damage from us. So that's pretty much the same as the Defiler's Rage Blight. As well, it is a pretty powerful hitting ability, doing 20, almost 25 with my stats to 27.5k damage. When you think about it, the spam attack with Shaman for our physical damage is Crushing Blow, which does 13 to 14.7k damage. So obviously combined effort is more hard hitting than our spam physical attack. If you don't know why I'm mentioning physical attack, is that Shaman does air and water damage and then does physical damage. And you get a buff that, forget where in the talent it is, but your non-physical damage abilities, not all though, apply a buff to you that then increases your physical damage by a certain amount. Here, let me see what we can find here. I always do suggest that you go over your talents when learning a spec, so that way you know how things are affected, because the tooltips of your abilities are not updated. Things in your talent tree where you have the critical hit chance of all abilities increased by 5% has to be all abilities. You will see in the tooltip that spell crit, I have that +1. Reason why it's only +1, not +5, is because Steady Assault is reducing my overall crit chance by 4%. If I went to Faith's Reward here, save that, over the spell crit, you see it's 26.65. It says 21.65 from my gear, plus 5. That 5 is from the full increase of all abilities from Vicious Streak. As well, there's Frozen Embrace, increasing chance to critical hit with air and water abilities by 10%. That is not in the tooltips of your stat window. So all air and water abilities, you gotta remember that you're actually critting 10% more than what it shows here. So with Faith's Reward, instead of the decrease to crit chance, I'm sitting at a 36.65% chance to crit with air and water spells. So some abilities definitely have a higher crit chance that aren't reflected. So another good reason to look over your talents to figure out what all is happening. Another thing is a pattern of violence in Shaman Tree. All our weapon attack abilities reduce the cooldown of Massive Blow by 2 seconds. Massive Blow is a hard-hitting ability that's on a 15-second cooldown. Pretty much all the abilities that you're using, Druid included, combined effort, requires a melee weapon. It's a melee ability. Eruption of Life as well. Not really using anything Inquisitor except for Vex, which is an instant cast dot. But go over all the abilities here. Avalanche Strike is melee. Crushing Blows melee. Frozen Wrath melee. Glacial Strike melee. Icy Blow melee. Lightning Hammer says requires melee weapon. Jolt requires melee weapon. Even our AoE Strike of the Maelstrom is an AoE melee weapon. Eckhart's Grasp is not. And our other AoE one, Avalanche Strike, is, but with doing AoE, you're not worried about Massive Blow. So most of our abilities are always reduced to the cooldown of Massive Blow, which makes using some cooldowns a little bit more interesting, because if it's about a refresh Massive Blow, you don't want to use one ability. For PvP, we have Numbing Cold ability that from the talent tree, reducing healing absorption received to that player by 10%. Other thing with Massive Blow is Brutalize talent here. Massive Blow then does a bleed of additional 45% of its damage over 3 seconds. Another one to know for sure, Shocking Conclusion. Damage done with our Lightning Dot is increased by 30%, but as well increasing damage done with Jolt after a critical hit with a weapon attack by 120%. So just to close out of this for a second, Jolt here, as you see, is 6-second cooldown ability. It does very mediocre damage, 7k there, but it says in the tooltip this damage is increased by 170% if used within 6 seconds of a critical hit with a weapon attack. So makes it pretty useful to use it after a critical hit. Of course, when you don't have the improved Jolt buff, that's what the little talent does, is when you critical hit with a weapon you get improved Jolt as a buff, and that increases the Jolt damage. If you're not using an improved Jolt, your Jolt is actually a DPS loss. Rage of the North talent, of course, this is one of our prime cooldowns. Every 1 minute we can add 10 stacks, which each stack increases our crit chance by 10%. Every time we crit, 1 stack gets away. So you have 100% chance to crit and 90% chance to crit. Well, actually a little bit more, because with 9 stacks, if you still had 10% crit chance, you'd still have a 100% chance to crit. Frostbite here is the buff I was talking about originally. Your non-physical weapon attacks increase your damage done with your next physical weapon attack by 30%. As well, with Soul Collector, level 61 Mastery, it says Eckhardt's Grasp will now apply Frostbite if points have been spent into it. So Frostbite, that's what it is. If you remember me saying, when looking through the Shaman abilities, Eckhardt's Grasp is our only one that it does not require a melee weapon, and it's 30-meter range. So with our masteries, it does count as a melee weapon non-physical attack. So it will apply the Frostbite, which increases your next physical damage. Obviously with this, though, is the only other non-physical one that doesn't require a melee weapon is Vex. Vex will not apply Frostbite, but because it deals, well, right now, 26 to 31 death damage over 15 seconds, compared to one of our harder hitting abilities, Massive Blow does 28,201 as max. So Vex does enough damage to warrant using a global cooldown, but of course after using it won't apply the Frostbite. So when you apply Vex, what you have to do is one of our Shaman abilities that is non-physical damage, Vex, and then you use a physical damage ability. Obviously that doesn't matter which order you use Vex in. You can use Vex and then our non-physical damaging ability, and then physical damage. Shaman follows a priority system, that's why I'm kind of going over all of this information here. Deep Freeze is one of our other big cooldowns, 1 minute cooldown. Time it with raid cooldowns and all that. So always highly suggest going over your talents, making sure you understand how talents are affecting different things, because like that's one of the things. Jolt, very weak damage, but if you get a critical hit with a melee weapon with a weapon attack, then obviously Jolt gets a lot more powerful. So to go from there, let's look at my macros here. Our AoE abilities are Avalanche Strike, which is non-physical damage, and then Strike of the Maelstrom, which is physical damage. The other thing that works around with this is Frozen Wrath. In its tooltip, it does state that alright, there's two things here. Whenever you have Frozen Wrath dot on a target, your Vengeance of Winter Storm is increased by 100%. Vengeance of Winter Storm is one buff. It is your single target buff, procs extra damage when it's done. Your AoE one procs damage up to 5 enemies when you keep on AoEing using an attack. Splash damage as well is Vengeance of the Primal North. Frozen Wrath does not, when it's on, does not increase the damage of Primal North, just of Winter Storm. As well, Frozen Wrath will spread up to 5 nearby enemies if hit by your Strike of the Maelstrom. So, I have a macro here for Avalanche, which does Frozen Wrath, which is a non-physical ability, so it will increase your next physical weapon attack. You can then use Strike of the Maelstrom, spread that dot to other AoE targets, and then go into Avalanche Strike, which will then buff your next Strike of the Maelstrom, and you just keep rotating through them. To show you a little quick thing here, I'm going to apply Frozen Wrath just singularly to one normal practice dummy here. So as you can see, I got the physical damage buff. The dot is on that one. I'm just going to even attack a different one and use my Strike of the Maelstrom. And this one now has Frozen Wrath on it, but the first one is going to fall off. So as long as you hit one with Frozen Wrath, it will spread to others around it. This works as well since sometimes there's a 1 second delay where the first one will fade off, but the other ones will have it still on. And so it will reapply it to the first one, and then spread it back to the second ones. So normal for AoE rotation is just go between the Avalanche Strike macro and Strike of the Maelstrom. As well, having Vengeance of Primal North procs a lot of damage to enemies. So pretty much that is your AoE rotation, is you make sure you have Vengeance of Primal North on, make sure all your other buffs are on, and then you rotate between the Avalanche Strike macro and just the ability Strike of the Maelstrom. So that's the macro there. There's also 2 different shields that you're using. You get a shield from Druid called Shield of Oak. Shield of Oak absorbs 25% of damage taken up to, at this one it's saying just over 10k damage. It increases your movement speed by 5% last 30 seconds. As well, there is a mastery affecting that. Shield of Oak and Glacial Shield reapply themselves if they're consumed within 5 seconds of their initial application. So when you're expecting a lot of raid damage incoming to you, I would suggest blowing one of your shields and then using another. So the macro here is just applying Shield of Oak and Glacial Shield. Reason for that is Glacial Shield, we look at it, absorbs 25% of damage taken up to 5,362 damage, but it also deals some water damage to attackers when hit. Thing is, it's half the value of the Shield of Oak, so Shield of Oak is better absorb shield than the Glacial Shield. As well, I could make a K alert to tell you if Shield of Oak is off use to use your second shield, so that way you're not overriding one of your shields at times. I'll do that after a bit. So the main thing is we have a physical damage macro and a non-physical one for Frostbite. Non-physical one is Frozen Wrath, Glacial Strike, Icy Blow, and then if we're out of melee range, use Eckhardt's Grasp. Pretty much, if you look at these abilities, Frozen Wrath is a dot first thing up. Now the thing with Frozen Wrath though, go and use it here. It's on my target. I can't use it again. I cannot apply Frozen Wrath until that dot falls off. So, it's in the first part of the macro. It does a lot of damage. It increases some of our other damage done. And you don't have to worry about overriding it because you can't reapply it until the dot has fallen off. So after, excuse me, after Frozen Wrath is we have Glacial Strike. Now if we look at Glacial Strike, that's an 8-second cooldown ability, but it's only usable on enemies under 30% health. So under 30% health we get this extra ability that helps increase our damage. Above 30% is, we don't have this ability. It's a pretty hard hitting ability. So yeah, under 30% health, especially when we get like a second flaring power or something, expect your DPS to go up pretty good. Icy Blow is our spam attack. As you can see, it doesn't do as much damage. My current gear so far, it's doing just shy of 15k max, not counting crits of course. But then again, this is water damage, which we have 10% extra crit compared to our non-air and water damage attacks. Sorry, I just realized I want to go back to Steady Assault here. So Eckhardt's Grasp, of course, out of melee range, does, with my gear, just shy of 12k. 30-meter range on that, so any disconnects, you're pretty much just spamming Eckhardt's Grasp. So that's it for the non-physical macro. Pretty much is out of under 30% is we're pretty much using two abilities, Glacial Strike and Icy Blow. Otherwise, once we have Frozen Wrath on our target and in melee range, we're just constantly using Icy Blow. The reason I'm mentioning this is from Druid Tree ability, Eruption of Life, is a DPS increase instead of using Icy Blow. So anytime you're about to use an Icy Blow and you do not have Eruption of Life on the enemy, use Eruption of Life instead. When you have stacks of Eruption of Life and you have to use a non-physical weapon, just spam one, Icy Blow. The reason for this is this does very little damage when you use it as an attack. You can spam this attack, Eruption of Life, but the thing is, it applies 5 stacks, which each time you hit the enemy with any attack, it reduces one of these stacks and does another extra, well, with my stats here, 2 to almost 2300 damage. So 2k to 2.2k damage extra proc when you use another ability. So it is a DPS increase overall. You want to be able to use that into your rotation. and its priority falls just above Icy Blow if you have no stacks on. Icy Blow takes priority over Eruption of Life if you do have stacks of Eruption of Life. Ideally, every 6th attack you want to be using an Eruption of Life. Other than that, we have our physical macro. This is all our physical damaging attacks. We have Punishing Strike, which is a mastery ability, so you have to pull it out from your Ascended Powers if you want to pull it onto your bar. This one is a hard-hitting ability, 27 to almost 30k damage with my stats. But the other nice thing about this is it refreshes Frozen Wrath. So since Frozen Wrath is a 15-second dot, this is up every 8 seconds. You're constantly refreshing Frozen Wrath, and you'll never have to reapply Frozen Wrath. The other thing it does is it applies the combined effort buff to the cleric if it's known. Of course, since we're high enough up in Druid to get combined effort, we do know it. Combined effort, as I said before, let's look at it here, it applies a buff to us for 15 seconds, which our single targeting damaging abilities apply a debuff to our target, which they then take 5% more increased damage from us for 5 seconds. Combined effort itself is a 15-second cooldown, where Punishing Strike is an 8-second. So with Punishing Strike, we're always going to have combined effort up, the buff anyways. So after Punishing Strike, we have our Massive Blow. Massive Blow does slightly more damage than Punishing Strike, but because Punishing Strike applies the combined effort one, our Massive Blow will then do 5% more damage when we use it. Before the Masteries with level 60 Shaman, you had to really watch your Massive Blow and your combined effort cooldowns, because you did not want to use a Massive Blow if you did not have combined effort buff on yourself. Obviously, because that Massive Blow would be slightly weaker, and Massive Blow, because of our talents, does a 3-second bleed for 45% of the damage done. So more damage of our Massive Blow means more damage of that bleed. After Massive Blow, we're using Combined Effort again. The reason for this is Combined Effort still does up to, well, with my stats, 27.5k damage. When you look at our next attack of Crushing Blow, which is our spam physical damage ability, sorry, mouse slid down as I released it, is only doing about 15, almost 15k damage with my stats. So obviously, combined effort, even though our Punishing Strike keeps the buff constantly up on us, the ability itself of combined effort does more damage than our spam attack. So it's still worth it to have it in our physical macro. Of course, these are all melee ranged abilities. So if you're outside of melee range, you can still use Eckhart's Grasp. It's at the end of both of the macros, so no matter which macro you're hitting while you're out of range, you'll at least be doing some damage instead of no damage as you try and use a melee ability when you're outside melee range. So that's it really for the macros. As I said, it's a priority system. So obviously priority is start off with the non-physical damage, which then gives us a buff that increases our damage of our physical damage ability. So you're always rotating between non-physical and physical, and then back to non-physical. So the priority normally is Frozen Wrath, physical damage, Jolt every time that you get a crit and you get the improved Jolt. You'll see it come up with a reactive, as well with my K-Alert if you take my K-Alert set. Then again, like always a physical damage thing. Lightning Hammer and Vex. And then Eruption of Life, and then your Icy Blow spam. Of course, every time you have the increased physical damage, you have to use a physical damage increase, which the only two that you should have on your bars are the physical damage macro and Strike of the Maelstrom. Those are the only two abilities that will use up that buff. Obviously, if you don't use the macro, you'll pull out more abilities that will be non-physical damage. So just looking at K alerts here, not counting the defensive cooldown K alert, which I could make 2 or 1 of them. We have the increase to physical damage. We have Eruption of Life. We have an improved Jolt 1. Jolt to watch the cooldown. We have the Dot from our Brutalize, which is our bleed from Massive Blow. We have the Lightning Hammer Dot. And then we have Vex. So just looking at how I have it laid out here, every time that we use a non-physical melee weapon attack or Eckharp's Grasp, we get the buff that increases our physical damage. So whenever we have this buff, our next attack should be a physical damage 1. If we don't have it up, we want to use a non-physical damage attack. So priorities of that is Frozen Wrath, which is the first in our non-physical macro, which also our Punishing Strike refreshes, so it should never fall off, which I deleted that K alert for that, because since now it never falls off, you should not need to worry about it, considering it's in both your spam macros for non-physical damage, whether it be AoE with Avalanche Strike or the single target macro. We have the bleed from Massive Blow here. Obviously that icon looks definitely like a bleed. Reason why you want to track this is we have a cooldown called Rush of Strength, which resets the cooldown on Massive Blow. Obviously you do not want to clip the bleed. So after the bleed is done, or just when it's at 1 second, you want to use Rush of Strength and then hit with a second Massive Blow and reapply the bleed. Rush of Strength is on a 30-second cooldown, and because with the spam macros, it might not be the next ability you use in case Punishing Strike comes off of cooldown. Punishing Strike, of course, is before Massive Blow in the macro. So you gotta watch Punishing Strike, you gotta watch that bleed, and you gotta watch Rush of Strength cooldown, because you can use it every 30 seconds. The better you get the timing of those, of course you'll increase your DPS. We have below that bleed, we have Eruption of Life. This will show the stacks, which will go away when we don't have any more stacks left and should refresh Eruption of Life. The Jolt icon with the plus is our improved Jolt, meaning you always want this one up before you use Jolt. Second one here is just the normal Jolt. I have it set to show when Jolt has 2 seconds left on the cooldown because of its 6-second cooldown. So pretty much is anytime you have improved Jolt up and the Jolt is ready to be used, you pretty much want to use it. As well, we have Vex, 15-second dot, does not apply the physical damage increase buff. And then we have Lightning Hammer, which is another 15-second dot. Sorry, just a second here. Thought I'd make a quick K alert. Sorry, just thinking how I want to modify it, if I want a timer or not. I think that should just work. So there's our shield icon. So obviously, use the shield macro, applies that shield of oak, lasts for 30 seconds, but only absorbs, well, with my gear, 10k damage pretty much. Of course, with the mastery, if you take 10k damage within 5 seconds of its initial application, it will refresh it. So with one use, we'll have 20k damage absorbed. After this is gone and we're still taking some massive damage, we can use Glacial Shield. Once we use Glacial Shield, though, we can overwrite the Shield of Oak. You're only allowed one of the shields, so that's why I just made that K alert. So, since it takes a little bit to get a dungeon pop with just King as DPS, here, I'll show you AoE first again. The Vengeances share a global cooldown of 5 seconds, so you can't readily switch between them as easily. So again, with AoE rotation, normally for trash, there is some AoE fights with bosses where you might want to use some cooldowns, but most AoEs is just trash, which you don't want to care about really, cooldowns, because you want them up for boss fights. I have my AoEs on my shift bar as shift 4 and 5, so I'm just going to do that here. And all you do is, like I said, you rotate between the avalanche macro and the strike of the maelstrom. So as you can see here, just this dummy things here, I'm pulling like over 110k damage just right now. As you can see all the nice, pretty numbers. The Vengeance of Primal North is the main icon that you can see, just proccing so much. All these things close by. So now I'll just right away break combat. So really, you just rotate between the two abilities, well, one macro and the one ability, and you'll have great damage. So by the time I broke combat, 40-second parse ended at 102.6k damage. That was with just the Vengeance of Primal North. Just to show you how much damage switching between the Vengeances can do, I'll redo that AoE damage, but with the Primal North buff on. Or sorry, the Winter Storm buff. Now, Frozen Wrath does increase the damage of the Winter Storm, but it's only on the one target. But as you can see here, 20-second parse, not over the 150k, I'm slightly under it. So, it is an increase on big packs. Primal North does proc up to 5 enemies. It does look like I'm doing a little bit more for rocking some AoE Winter Storm sometimes, but it doesn't make up enough compared to the Primal North buff. You still get more AoE damage with having the Vengeance of Primal North up. So running and breaking combat yet again. That was a slightly longer parse, but either way, it still did not give us the damage as the other one. Now, of course, I run ACT as my meter for DPS. Gives us a nice breakdown of abilities, what crits, how much damage you're doing, how much of our abilities had gives a nice spreadsheet here. Let me show it. Little graph here so you can kind of see, but if I open it up and look at my attack out, get a little pie graph. Frozen Wrath did 33% of the damage as an AoE parse. Pretty important to always keep Frozen Wrath up, as you can see. Vengeance of Primal North did the second amount with 26%. Strike of the Maelstrom, 24%, and then 15% was our Effluent Strike. Of course, as well, I had my Core Fragment proccing. That only did 2%. Auto Tag did 0, and I have no clue what Dream of Madness actually is, but it said 0% of Dream of Madness. Really, it did 409 encounter damage, 16.369 total damage. So, it's a water resist, hit 3 times, didn't crit at all. So as you can see, it does a nice breakdown, and you can look at it like, again, outgoing damage instead of attack out, and can even just click on it even more. Crits, false, true, 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 false, true, false, like, that tells you like which ones I critted on, which ones I didn't, times of them, all that sort of stuff. So, really nice breakdown. Now to look at the other one, my outgoing damage. Frozen Wrath did 38% of the damage compared to the 33. Vengeance of Winterstorm did 22, where my other one, Vengeance of Primal North, did 26. So 4% difference with my gear between those two buffs to do single target or AoEing with either of them. The AoE buff does bring out quite a little bit more damage, as you can see just from that. So everything else is kind of pretty similar. 22 Strike of Maelstrom, 15 or 6% Avalanche Strike, which is 15% Avalanche Strike and 24% Strike of the Maelstrom. Pretty much that is just looking at different crit values. Like as well, Core Fragment didn't proc as often, or didn't crit it with a couple of the procs, so down to 1% instead of the 2%. ACT really gets, you can really look into it and see how you're comparing between different polls, how you're comparing between yourself to another person running the same spec, to see like if you're trying to compare to me and we're in the same raid setup, and you know, you maybe not be using your jolt as often, maybe you're not critting as often to use your improved jolt. So it does a nice breakdown so you can see where you're differing from somebody else with rotation wise. So for our buffs, we have Armor Devotion from Inquisitor, increasing our crit chance. We have Heart of the Frozen Sea, which increasing resistances. This is normally overwritten in raid settings by, I think, an Archon. But in 5-man and stuff, it's great to run. Reduce damage taken, of course, from non-physical attacks. We have Fury's Assault, which reduces our global cooldown to 1 second. Mana's reduced cost, and but it reduces our area effect damage by 25%. Now, doing, you know, 2 attacks in 3 seconds, or doing 3 attacks in 3 seconds, I believe the damage reduction still isn't worthwhile to take this buff off. I believe we still do more damage without it, with it on, even if it reduces our AoE damage by 25%. But as well, just using this buff applies our 3 courage buffs. So otherwise, you want to take out your Courage of the Bear, Courage of the Eagle, and Courage of the Panther to hit all of them. But just using Fierce Assault applies all three. Courage of the Panther increases damage done by 14% and allows us to ignore 5% of our target's armor and resistances. Also, our mana cost is reduced by another 5%. Courage of the Eagle increasing our wisdom by 5%, and Courage of the Bear increasing our base health by 5%. Just for shits and giggles, let me take off Fury Assault here. Go back to Adventures of the Primal North. And let's see, with the slower global cooldown, what my damage is more like. So as you can see, not even over 100k here in 20 seconds, just kind of broke it. Where before, I was more around 120k and started to fall a little. So the increased global cooldown, or sorry, the decreased global cooldown, even if it reduces our damage by 25%, is still worth it. You get more damage in the long run. So running, breaking combat. Changing over to Winter Storm and reapplying the Furious Assault, so I'm back down to 1 global cooldown. So now we'll just go to single target. Shaman as well is really great for at times with fights where there's more than one boss. Looking at it, the triplets in Run of Fate, you're normally fighting 2 bosses at the same time until you kill 2 of them and just down to 1. So every once in a while, throwing out a Strike of the Maelstrom, you'll spread Frozen Wrath to the second target, which will do 60, well, with my gear, almost 62k damage over 15 seconds. So pretty much every 15 seconds, 16 seconds, you want to use a Strike of the Maelstrom to respread that dot to the second one, and that's where you'll get a lot of some splash damage, is just spreading that one dot of Frozen Wrath. 61k damage is no laughing matter over 15 seconds. So definitely, if you can spread Frozen Wrath, do it, and then just focus back on single target. Really, if there's... I think the magic number still is if there's over 3 targets, do AoE rotation. If there's... I know at least if there's 2 targets, you want to do a single target rotation. I can't recall if it's 3 and up or at 3 targets, still do the single target rotation. Play around with that with things if you want to. But I know for sure if there's 2 targets, single target rotation, and just use Strike of the Maelstrom to splash Frozen Wrath onto the other target. And I think it's 3 and up, just do a AoE rotation. So, pre-pull, you can use Rage of the North. It lasts for 60 seconds and it's a 1-minute cooldown. So, you know, if you're waiting for the tank to pull, you can preload it. If you know for sure that he's, like, you have 30 seconds, you can pretty much start the fight. Ideally, when it's at 30 seconds, this allows you within 30 seconds to use another Rage of the North. Excuse me for the cough. Throat a little dry with all this talking. Anyways, so now that 20 seconds left, just start my rotation, non-physical using physical, and you can see the buffs popping up. Huge jolt when the huge jolt pops up. Now at the moment, the bleed came up, off, reapplied it, because my next ability would have been it resetting it. Punish threat was not the next one. So Jolt was ready before I had a crit that improved my Jolt, so I didn't want to use it right then. But pretty much it's knowing when to use your abilities, getting that priority system ready, and knowing it more often. So really with melee specs, the other thing is, of course, you have to be within 3 meters to be a melee attack, or else you'll be outside of it. So here, as you can see, EG is keep going. I'm at 3.7 meters. EG is at first grasp, so I'm not using any of my abilities. 3.1, still spamming it at first grasp. So 3 meters and closer, you'll start using your melee attack abilities, your melee range ones. Only difference is in PvP, if target is jumping or moving, then melee range will increase to 4 meters. It's a little bit easier to keep up with. Of course, in raid fights, the tanks normally don't constantly move bosses, and when they do move it, it's kind of predictable when it's going to happen. So you should be able to keep in melee range on the move a little bit with knowing when the tank is going to move it, how the tank is going to move it. But of course, if there is disconnects, especially long ones, you'll at least be able to spam some damage to keep yourself up. But of course, the longer you're disconnected, you'll start falling behind in DPS. So, Shaman and really all melee specs fall into that sway where, you know, disconnects is their enemy. Fights that aren't really melee friendly are kind of annoying with that. But if you have the skill to make it work, with avoiding like run out mechanics and stuff, run away from boss, sometimes it really pays off. That melee normally tends to be the best DPS for each class. Normally parses higher. I think they're still working on some Shaman changes, so hopefully we'll see some improvement soon. But it's probably say on par with Inquisitor. Of course, different fights, especially ones where you can splash some damage, do a little bit AoE, you're going to get more DPS than Inquisitor just because we thrive with more targets. So as I said again, it's pretty much knowing the priority rotation. It'll be posted on the forums, in the guild forums, with the spec. But as well, I'll just say it again, anytime that you have the physical increase buff, you use a physical attack, of course. You always use a non-physical damage attack to proc that buff. The only one that does not proc that is Vex. I kind of refresh Vex normally with Lightning Hammer because they're both 15 seconds. Priority of really is non-physical damage attacks because the physical damage one is just set perfectly to use your damaging abilities in the best order, so you don't have to prioritize that. But you want to use priority normally is Frozen Wrath, Lightning Hammer, Vex, Rupture of Life, and then Icy Blow. The only change where it does is if you have stacks of Eruption of Life, Icy Blow is more priority than Eruption of Life, of course. other than that, though, is every time you have an improved jolt, you want to use that. So those are the only two things that change around in the priority list is jolt and the icy blow. Uh, so hope this was very informative to you. The best thing is to just practice, get comfortable with the rotation. I do suggest to just kind of get used to it is start off with just the basic rotation of the non-physical macro to the physical macro and back and forth, and then just using jolt when it procs. Then start throwing in lightning hammer once you get comfortable with just back and forth between the two macros and jolt. After you get used to throwing in lightning hammer, I suggest throwing in vex. And once you're used to throwing in those two, throw in eruption of life. Um, it's always better to learn in stages than just try for a perfect rotation at first. You know, get comfortable with just doing lower DPS, but getting a feel for how to go through the abilities and then adding more abilities into the rotation to begin with. I highly suggest doing that for Shaman. Anyways, thank you very much. Hope this was informative. And if you have any questions, just talk to me or message me. That'll be great.